Ironlight. God, such a sex name. It keeps me every time. All right, what has happened in this last week? I'm in a period of D&D absence of withdrawal, as are you, I know, Charlie. Because this week's session was canceled, but it's fine. Give us time to do this and talk about last week's. For Foreboding International, a party of three. We have Moody Space Doctor, Claymore Patch, like Death Space Doctor thing. It's his thing. We have like Tormented Good Light Cleric Boy Monk, Cal Reverie, which is like the tormented Southern guy. And then we have Badass Pride Killer Monk, Baragon Emberclaw, the Leonin Catfolk. Joined by, they have a recruit Azalea. This week's session was a dungeon. I ended the last session with them arriving at the second meteorite jar. And that's kind of what I've been doing to divide up how this campaign progresses. It was really shaky at first, but it is basically sorted now between these meteorite shard, like main storyline quests, and in between, the party picks up quests from Prince Parless back in the Old Kingdom, or they'll be free to do whatever they want, really, as to that situation. But this is the second meteorite shard. This is the second big dungeon that I planned from the beginning. But the party arrives, and Claymore Patch has some ESP psychic connection that presides over this place, that guides him through it. So he knows the map of the entire dungeon before the rest of the party do. And the reason why this is, he knows, is because his warlock patron, Dr. Bleakwood, presides over all of these spatial things, has some connection to it that is directing him. So, called by this strange instruction, Claymore Patch leads them down into the buried meteorite under hundreds of feet of sand, which is, I toiled away for ages at this dungeon design. It is designed like a body, and Claymore Patch has a sense for the organism of this dungeon. Each room in it corresponds to an organ or an organ system in the body, and serves a function for its perpetual maintenance of energy, which Clay has figured out is part of how it traveled. It was like a living soul thing on its own. So he's navigating from room to room based on just his understanding of, he would put his hand in the door and be like, these are the claws for the ship. We need to be more careful. Or like, this is the stomach for the ship. We need to give it a wiper. The party starts in the mouth and immediately makes their way into the brain. The brain is this think tank, this giant acid soup pool, in the middle of which hovers a mind witness, with a single eye and no mouth. It can only communicate telepathically. And it's the ship's navigator, is what it calls itself. So the party, between hints they pick up from the navigator and other rooms they scavenge around to on the first floor, start to piece together kind of how this place works and what it is. They pick up Regadium in the opposite room, which I believe was the rib cage or something for the ship. It's a prison, a holding cell. And in there is a mind flayer, trapped by a glass door, so they can see him and interact with him. He's stuck just on the other side. And he loathes his prisonly capture. Yeah. Total drama queen of a character. A lot of fun to RP. The players talk to him and figure out that the ship has defense mechanisms. When it picks up things like food or sources of energy that enter, it sends out beings to capture them and bring their essence down to the stomach. So the party braces themselves, and a boss fight comes their way. This like hulking one giant arm, one humanoid arm, flesh monster thing. Sends a bunch of attacks, and it's a really, really cool fight scene. We have a lot of good moments. Another great fight scene just after that, as the party wipes the floor with him. They then come across the Claws room that I mentioned earlier, and inside of it are these tiny metal spheres, which they defeated not by fighting normally, but by having Dr. Clay, who has like this weird connection to the place still, change the gravity settings for the room. It was a lot of fun, and it was fascinating. At some point, they send Baragon, the only stealthy one in the party, to check out the floor below them, and he picks up one of my favorite items so far, the energy shield for the party. It's very science fiction. It's a core that fits on your chest, and when you push the center of it, it surrounds you with this like thin electric film. I think Dr. Patch is wearing it now, but it'll probably switch hands a few times in the party with things I have planned coming up. But they also see, and this was about where we left the session off, they see in the middle of this whole dungeon a beholder stuck behind one-way glass, bashing over and over again against the walls. The computer tells them he is a true name entity, which means a being so powerful that it has a real name, not the thing that it's colloquially called, but an essential name. I steal this from Ursula Le Guin's Wizard of Earthsea. And that when you say that name, you disable the creature completely. You've destroyed it. They also learn there's another true name creature on board. And they reason out pretty quickly, based on where the computer says it is, that it's Claymore Patch. So that enters this. The eyebrows from Cal told me that maybe he missed out on that, but I'm certain that Clay and Varagon did not. So you're welcome. You're caught up to speed. But now there's this weird, confusing state. We left off in the middle of the dungeon. I'm not sure how it'll wrap up next. I've got some plans. They haven't even seen the bottom floor yet, which has its own new set of organs and its own little, mini games. But the option will be soon available to them to open the center and fight the Beholder, if that's their wish. So we'll see how that goes. The CR is way over leveled for the party, but I think they're ready. They're pretty powerful. They've got a bunch of tricks up their sleeve. Yeah, I mean, someone will probably die. That disintegrate is advanced. Whatever. In any case, that's the summary for the session. It was pretty old school dungeon delving, going from room to room. I had a lot of fun designing the dungeon with like a Herbertian, like a Frank Herbert style energy consideration, so that everything they kill is an energy source, potentially. I had like a dire rat mini fight in the opening room to sort of tutorial how this works. And every big doorway or every item unlock has an energy receiver that you can plug things into. So the party's gonna have to decide what things they kill and where they spend the energy that they've acquired. If they kill the Mind Flayer that they just picked up, he's a huge energy source. He could get him something sweet. But it's a huge RP decision to do that, even though he's super evil. So I thought it would make some really cool tensions. I was right. It's been a lot of fun so far. Charlie, you have taken over full musical control for these sessions, which I really think just amplifies the effect. The music's been sweet, the ambiance is there, and it's been a fuck ton of fun to play. I really look forward to what they see in the bottom floor and how it section. But it's very clearly Claymore Patch's dungeon. It's his, maybe arc is too big of a word, but it's his show right now. Since the item they're going for, they know well, he's the one predestined for him. Lokenwild, Dusklash. Which was the name of this session, and our wrap-up for it will be Lokenwild the Dusklash, Part 2. Unsurprisingly. But it left on a quiet and comfortable note. And that's where the FBI is at. I mean, do you concur, Doctor?
I'm a little bit jealous that Cal doesn't have a true name. But whatever.
I'll give it a bit.
The stakes are high. The stakes are high for Dr. Clay. Bobo, did you want to talk about the behind the screen stuff, or did you want to pass it off? It's up to you.
Oh, it's over to you. They're behind the screen again. Usually I'm improvising a lot with these last few sessions. With a dungeon, I couldn't really do that since I had to give the map beforehand. So I planned out all the rooms. The big improv, there was one big improv from last session, which was the Claws room was only supposed to have turrets in it that once defended the dungeon itself. But as soon as Clay spent energy on the gravity controls, which I thought was cool, I thought it was a great idea.
That was clever.
Yeah, I wanted to give him a way to use it. So I filled the entire upcoming room with these glass spiders and gave him a line of sight to it with Azalea, who's the wizard traveling with the party, creating a mirror with silent image or something. And I prayed that he would spare me having to improv this creature and roll up an initiative and just switch the gravity up to 10, reverse it, and crash them all against the ceiling. And he did. I mean, it's super railroading, but I mean, it's egregious railroading even for me. But it was funny. It was funny.
Glass spiders, man, that's a terrifying image. So we'll talk about it though. We'll talk about it. Let me get my stuff out of the way. All right. So this is going to be, I'm going to be covering Kartikeya, our Warforged Wizards, essentially his one-shots. Now, the last time we picked up, Kartikeya had been compelled by these chains holding one of Krust's dads to the wall of a cave to flee from the place and go as far and as fast as he possibly could. So he busts open a 7th level spell plane shift to get to the Feywild, right? So he appears in the University of Islam, which is this gigantic, like, it's the capital of Elven, sort of the Feywild capital, like Elven place, the metropolis, Utopia. The military stronghold, university in the Feywild is there. Mostly Eladrin living there, though some other races do filter in and through. The city's so vast, I haven't actually finished designing them. Because, you gotta bite off, there's one way to eat an elephant, and it's one bite at a time, right? So he appears in the teleportation room in the University of Islam, stops this random guy, and he's asking him, hey, I need to get back to the material, plane. Where do I get a plane shift? Where do you get your spells first, right? I need to buy a spell, right? Where's your spells are us in Islam? The guy was like, well, I don't know anything about any spells are us, but there is the Deep Shrine Library, Temple Library of Deep Sashawas across town. Now, this is an interesting point for Greg, who's Kartikeya's player, because his first character, Azaki, was an elf himself and a native of the Feywild in Abyssal. So his new character is now sort of navigating a place that Azaki knows well. And his two characters are going to be interacting quite a bit, big spoilers, throughout this little stretch. So Kartikeya, as politely as he can, flies through the university, over its campus, to find this library and get back to help his new friends quickly as possible. Only to run into a strange statue of a depiction of one of Craig's previous characters' previous lives. Now, in the lore of elves of Eladrin in our world, elves are reincarnated, right? A la Critical Role. His previous life was a great hero of the Underdark, Laushan Alora, an elf himself, with a fabled sword. There's a statue of his likeness in the city that Kartikeya passes, by which a strange hooded cloaked figure is standing. The cloaked figure takes notice of Kartikeya only to reveal himself to be Greg's previous character. That Spider-Man meme where they're pointing at each other, 1950s, like, who, what? And in this moment, and I think in this moment as well, Greg and I both forgot. Kartikeya would recognize God. Kartikeya would have been like, oh, this is the guy that was traveling with the party before I was. But it slipped both of our minds. And Kartikeya went on his business, his merry business as usual. So Kartikeya heads to this Deep Shrine Temple Library, shows up to find one of the military police of the city, by the name of Garrison Leader Gawatni, and two of the library guards. Now, this big fancy title for the Shrine Library, it's for a reason. It's actually, in addition to being a library, it's also a holy place. It is a hallowed site. to worship Sashalos, right? Who's his elven god. He shows up. He's like, "Hey, I want to." Well, I guess it shows up. It considers itself to be important context. It considers itself to be a construct. It's something shy of a real person, sort of a Pinocchio situation. It settles down. Obviously, everybody's a little bit startled to see a robot, a giant robot. I mean, my man is 7 foot tall. He's got a glowing gem spinning around in his chest, no eyebrows, and giant jewel glowing eyes, no ears. Definitely a hard sell. I'm getting a little bit tired of every time he goes into a crowd of people narrating. Oh, everybody's pointing and having conversations, speculating about, who controls you and like what's going on. But anyway, he settles down, strikes up a conversation. And Gwadney says, the garrison leader Gwadney explained, "It's funny you're chasing after spell scrolls, when in fact a number of spell scrolls were just stolen from the University of Islam. What are the odds that's a coincidence?" And Karthikeya's like, "I don't have anything to do with that. I don't have any." And Karthikeya, at this point, the gears are spinning in its head, pun intended. On his way out of the university, he passes by a strange scene. One of the, it seems, staff at the University of Islam, standing in a doorway through which, impassively, he can see broken glass. But he chooses to sort of leave the situation behind and prioritize. That's sort of explained. And so he's starting to get the blanks filled in for him. He's like, Karthikeya's like, "Okay, well, these spell scrolls are stolen. What does that have to do with me?" Garrison leader Gwadney's like, "It doesn't have anything to do with you other than the fact that those two things have a lot to do with each other." Okay? And so now Karthikeya is letting on that this is a little bit suspicious. Garrison leader Gwadney says, "Listen, the way I see it, you get two choices. We bring you in, we ask you a lot of questions, we kill your time, or I stick your neck out. I stick my neck out for you, and you help us figure this out." Okay? And in that moment, Karthikeya's like, "What? Like, what? This feels shallow. This is like, how could I have been swept up in this? This feels so strange. This feels like coincidence. It was the right place at the wrong time, or the wrong place at the right time. Who knows what to call it?" In that moment, I was like, you know what? Garrison leader Gwadney doesn't have a lot of reason to do this. And the session ends, right? Now we're picking up to the next session in the middle of this conversation between Karthikeya, Garrison leader Gwadney, guards who are just watching and listening. And right, so these temple guards, these library guards, they're the ones most concerned about these spell scrolls because they're sacred to the temple library. Right? There's a lot at stake for them if they're moving these scrolls. So they're listening, they're orbiting, they're trying to make sense of all of this. And right at the start of the session, where we pick up between sort of the tense conversation where Karthikeya has to make a choice about what he does next: kill time and help this situation out in the hopes that something pulls through for him, or take things on his own terms. Now, in between sessions, I had sat down with Greg, and Greg actually warned me. He said, "You know what? All this being said, all this conversation and everything, it doesn't matter. Karthikeya is going to find a mercenary and help and ask and pay that mercenary to help him find another way out of the Feywild and back to the material plane." And I was like, you know what? I respect it. Why waste time? But in that moment, I also realized I needed to increase the stake and sweeten the pot. So the follow-up and final session of Karthikeya's sort of far removed one-shot in the Feywild starts with Garrison leader Gwadney getting a sending message right in the middle. He sort of turns around, very, very much like taking a phone call in the middle of an important conversation, turns back, and it's like, "Listen, I don't know why I'm sticking my neck out for you. It's just, it's giving me a strange sense. It's giving me the heebie-jeebies, okay? I have every reason to just take you in and make this day even more inconvenient for you than it seems to already be. But I'm giving you a choice, and I'm gonna offer you one of the spell scrolls, one of the recovered spell scrolls. I'll give it to you. I'll give you your choice if you're able to recover. At this point, as you'd expect, one of the temple guards starts to speak up. Hey, those are our spell scrolls. Harrison Guardian's like, oh, it's from on high. Just got it sending. Suspicious. And Kartikeya decides, okay, you know what? I'm gonna embark. I'm gonna give this a shot. I'm gonna give it a chance. And if it falls through, it falls through. I'm gonna play the field. I'm gonna talk to a mercenary. I'm gonna get my stuff. Okay, and so there's a lot more to that session, but I kind of want to keep it for time for brevity here. So I'm gonna start kind of going into the behind the screen DMing. This one shot here. There we go. We're cooking. So I kind of clued into sort of some of the DM behind the screen stuff with this session. So this was fresh off of our Charleston sort of reunion, all getting together and enjoying each other's company. But also everybody was enormously, tremendously, horrendously busy. And so it was kind of fortunate for us that we got to sort of do these split apart sessions because, I mean, that just made scheduling much more easy. Actually, the other party members, if they found time, they would like come and tune in and sort of watch what was going on with the session, which is very sweet of them. And not everybody could make it, but that's, you know, nature of the beast. I've thought a lot about kind of how my campaign would look different if I was a little bit more relaxed about attendance, right? So in my childhood best friend, Grant Murs, he's playing in a new session at his university in Illinois. And I was just sort of watching their session because I like to watch D&D. Their in-person session, I was sort of living vicariously through him because I missed in-person D&D so much. And at the end of the session, they were kind of talking about what the next session was going to look like and when they were going to get back together. And it's a group of 7. Like it's even a person larger than us. So I was like, wow, how the hell are they going to pull off this hat trick? You know, seven adults with wives. How are they going to do this? And then their DM, whose name was Leah, she was like, listen, I try not to run a session if more than one person is absent. But if only one person can't make it, we're going to try and run. And in that moment, I was like, wow, I guess that character isn't essential to the story. Like, in that moment, as a DM, you have to make a choice. What if it's a very that character-centric session? You have to change gears. What do you have to do? How do you make that work? It's I don't know. It's like a very realistic. It's like a very realistic thing. It's a very straight, like shoot from the hip. We got to make concessions because we're adults, and D&D is fun. But there are going to be some days when all of us but one can make it, and probably it would be for the best if we could just play D&D. And as far as the whole attendance thing goes and people showing up, and people scheduling, and adults being busy thing, I tend to lean more in the direction that Josh does, which is like, I'm gonna just get fewer players. Like the next campaign we're gonna do, it's gonna be 4 people, including me, right? It's gonna be 3 players and me. But somewhere down the line, it's gonna be tough. But I have to consider that maybe I'm gonna get to a point in my life and in my love of D&D that I might just have to play it like Leah does, which is if somebody's absent, they'll hop in next week. I have no idea how that would look. I have no idea how I would make that make sense. But it's practical. That being said, in regards to the session itself, Greg, who plays Kartikeya, is one of my most discerning players. We're the closest for sure out of all of my players. And he shoots me straight. I was in Ann Arbor spending time with him this last weekend. And he was shooting from the hip. He was like, listen, buddy, you've been Deus Ex Machinaing us, and it's no fun. The DM giving you the answer to a challenge, that doesn't leave space for the player to have fun and feel the satisfaction of being able to come up with the ingenuity to solve a problem themselves, you know? And that's sort of been our relationship for a long time. He's harsh, but you need somebody like that. You need somebody to sort of humble you, sort of keep you on your toes, because otherwise you're playing a game that people aren't enjoying as much as they could. He's a great player to play with, and it's much more a relationship. There's no power dynamic. And whenever there starts to be a power dynamic, I'm very quickly made to feel like, okay, this is an exchange. Like, I'm one guy, he's one guy. And playing one-on-one with him, I've done once before. There was another point where our party was just so busy, and so I actually, one of them was actually filling out med school applications. It was a mess. And so they were all separated, and we were running one-shots, just one-on-ones, for about 2 months. In between my move to Ann Arbor and Baltimore. It made sense for me too. And it was so much fun to spend time with him, be one-on-one. I will say that a one-on-one session is a lot harder to plan for than you would imagine. A 5-person session is you just assume there's going to be lots of dialogue, lots of conversation. They're going to propel the story forward, even though they can do more stuff as just by matter of teamwork and all manner of things like that. You have to create a world around a single person that is compelling enough to fill the time and stimulate choice, stimulate important decisions. And so the Feywild session was tough. It was overwhelming. It's tough not to railroad, especially with one person, to give them the space that they want, they deserve. And at the end of the day, the thing that Greg prioritizes the most, and I think the thing that most people prioritize in D&D is choice. You know, railroading is when you see that, you speak up, right? For Greg, that's definitely the case. And so just challenging myself to make that space for him, give him as much choice as possible, was fun. Like the next Ironlight show, I'll kind of get into what his journey through the Feywild and through Issylon was like. And it was bonkers. It was chaos. And the fact that he's a robot in a city of Eladrin, the fact that he's coming to terms with his personhood and confronting his previous character and his previous character's demons. I mean, I hope it was as fun for him as it was for me, because the other thing that Greg doesn't do does a great job of, or maybe doesn't do as great a job of, is letting on, he's all jokes, right? Greg, he has a sense of humor. He knows that I appreciate a sense of humor, but so much of my ego is wrapped up in this game. And so when I'm uncertain about if a player's having fun, or if I think a player is in fact not having fun, then there's a lot at stake. And Greg doesn't take it so seriously. He has fun with it. With him, it's a game. And I'm trying to get, and I think that my relationship to it is kind of unhealthy. I've talked to you about this a little bit, Josh. But Greg does a great job of sort of centering me, humbling me, and getting me in a place where I'm ready to receive feedback and give feedback about that feedback. So shouts out to him. Hopefully he sees this. I don't think I put any spoilers. And I'm excited to sort of show this episode to him. So that's my bit, Joj. If you want to kind of devolve into podcast mayhem, I'll do a little radio fade out here.
Yeah, sure. We never gave mention to where we're tuning in from. Mine obviously is a menagerie at the moment. I'll try and pace out my comments between the barking of my neighbor's dog, but it's because I'm in Mexico City for the first time.
Dude,
Where you at now, Charlie?
I'm stateside. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. Looking Valley of the Shadow of Death for my Ann Arbor peeps, though I fear no evil. Looking to head back north in a short while. But yeah, man, Josh, initial thoughts, initial reactions. I always got a million things to ask and say about the campaign I'm also a part of.
Yeah, you have a personally vested interest, so it makes sense. But no, same. I have long thought that like Praguespar was going to be this huge game changer because it was a campaign about the players as much as their player characters. Because it had like these elements of science fiction that started to show them. And the more I listen to you, the more I realized that like it's not as pioneered of a thing as I for whatever reason thought it was. It's cool. Like,
It's not. I mean, listen, I like Westworld. Greg likes Westworld. We wanted to do a robot. He's kind of a fish out of water. I think that both of our campaigns are sort of a marriage, a genre bent sort of situation.
That's cool though. I feel like that's probably a natural conclusion of like trying to set out to do these things. Uh, Science fiction, what's the difference between science fiction and fantasy, right? Science fiction has a relationship to reality, or a more direct one, or a more transparent one than fantasy has, right? Could you say that?
I mean, science fiction is sort of a fantasy of what could be in a more realistic future.
Sure,
right?
sure.
Perhaps.
So
whereas magic is sort of a version of fantasy that's out of reach. Sci-fi is one that's kind of fun in the sense that you could sort of imagine something like that being the case.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's an interesting dichotomy to strike.
Because my theory, if what you said and what I said are along the lines of truth, that fantasy or magic with relationship to explanation or closeness to reality is science fiction, then it would make sense that D&D would tend towards those things, right? Not that it's impossible to keep a game exclusively high fantasy, but D&D is a lot closer to reality than sitting down and writing a novel would be, because you got real people in real time. Like it's
I mean, there are people who are I guess there are people who are super faithful to the genre of specifically D&D brand fantasy, like Matt Mercer. And then there are people like Brennan Lee Mulligan in Dimension 20 who's like they're gonna crank out a, you know, Faerun meets Ferris Bueller's Day Off, sort of. Like, it's, you know, you got to play with the form. First edition was the time to be faithful to the genre because people were learning how to play the game. Completely tangential. Have you heard about 6th edition?
Wait, is this real?
This is real.
Heard if people had mentioned 6th edition.
2024. There's Reddit conversations going on. 6th edition.
Reddit talks? I don't know if that's enough for me.
Yeah, I don't know if it's enough for me either. But honestly, that's the first I've heard of 6th edition. Honestly, I'm surprised too that you haven't heard anything. I'm surprised that Aiden and James and Sam, none of them have heard anything. But it might also be that they're just kind of busy. I think everybody but you and I are kind of like D&D adjacent right now. Like everybody else is sort of post D&D right now among the vested interests. So maybe there's less of a concern with it. I don't know, but that's just what I've heard. I don't know what, like, just right off the top of your head, how do you feel?
I'm astonished. I thought they'd do a 5.5 before they did a 6e. Honestly, 5th edition is so crazy popular and so modifiable and accessible.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, would 5.5 be sort of like don't be too scared. Like it's like 5e, but it's just they've got these two, because from what I heard described about 6th edition, there are some major rules changes. I think that's true. But other than that, I think it's pretty similar. I mean, like, how different really is fourth edition and 3.5 from 5e? Like a lot of similar classes. People will go back and forth on and on. People who are reverent about the game and be like, "Oh, well, 4th E was like so customized." You know what I'm saying? Like it's all just
Yeah, it's similar means to the same end.
all roads lead to Rome. For the way I feel is like, yeah, I mean, I'll try it. I think I definitely like to keep with the times. If the Wizards of the Coast are like, listen, we're making a 6th edition because we believe 5e can be improved on, then I'm like, hell yeah, let's do it. You know?
Well, remains to be seen. Until such a time as our edition stops being produced, we shall act as if it continues to produce on.
The world keeps on spinning.
Yada yada. Well,
Dude,
how closely tied are we really to what Wizards says?
so that's interesting you bring that up because the most like raucous discontent that I've heard towards 5e and maybe the structure of D&D in general is from you and Big Bendra. I think along the lines of classes, sort of typecast characters. What I don't know. Kind of what else? What are your other qualms about
No,
5e?
those are the big ones. It's the limiting freedom that's given to player characters in the game. So I highly recommend Epics and Emprises. Jim, my dear friend Jim, has begun creating his own system, which he sets out specifically to cure those problems in 5e. It's his own RPG system. And other people have done it too. I think now is a really good time to look at other RPG systems that have been big in the last, I mean, they've been around forever in the last 25, 30 years, because a lot of them have been specifically geared towards other things than dungeon delving, which is at the heart of D&D, right? D&D is made out of adventures, and you string together adventures to make a campaign. That is like the basic idea of its construction. There are other RPGs out there that are really cool with totally different mechanics. And I think the game would be bettered by combining and collaborating with a lot of those. But I don't think Wizards will do it because as long as they keep things within their rule systems, they get to control their product a lot better. And where it becomes monetized and typecast, and I have very little interest in. So we'll see. I think RPG systems need to be reclaimed. The control needs to be taken back of the rule books in the decade to come for D&D.
Wow, wow. What what's the difference for you between between freedom and okay, no, let me rephrase that. Where's the line between structure and restriction? Right? Because what I hear you saying is I can't play the characters like I like because everybody assumes that it's going to be this. But is that just the structure of the way bards were written and people just sort of assuming certain things and having schema in their heads about how things are going to go? And it's just our job as players to sort of break through those. What do you think?
I would probably chalk it down to a problem with classes, I think. I think so long as you define very limiting classes, even when you have really cool subclasses, you're going to run into these problems. So emphasize abilities and emphasize skills and emphasize spells, but maybe don't typecast strict progressions through those, right? If you wanna have these kinds of spells and wield these kinds of weapons and wear this kind of armor, I mean, there will be some limiting factor. There will be some points system, or there will be some skill tree. Which again, epics and emprises, tell your friends it's all skill trees and experience points over there. But I think you need to be able to combine things outside of the scope of our current conception of classes.
What would you say about what would you say to those min maxers right now who are like customization? Oh hell yeah. Like I'm just going to beef the hell out of my character and take advantage of this customization system and really just bust my character.
I mean, it'll need its own balancings, of course. I've always found that individual players that min max need to be treated by individual DM responses. For example, don't feel bad about coming up with a monster that you think is specifically geared to be good at killing your party. I've totally done that for my campaign. I think it's a totally fair thing for DMs to do. If you notice a weakness in your characters or in your players, create something to deliberately challenge it. I think it's part of the game. I think that's how you handle min-maxers.
You know what? I've always gotten qualms. I've always felt some qualms from people from doing exactly that, making monsters to take advantage of my players' weaknesses, because I don't want them to feel targeted. And so I guess at the core of it, what you need to do as a DM is encourage your players to give their characters compelling weaknesses and ask for their permission to try and exploit them as a DM.
Oh, consent always finds its way back into these things.
Dude,
even min-maxers deserve it.
You got to talk to your players, man. You got to talk to your players. I try not to play with min-maxers for whatever that's worth. I think
that's a great starting point.
Lame. I think they're lame in general. But on that note, that's our time. Ironlight show. Episode 4, episode 3.
Episode 3. Two is a two-parter, but episode 3. 4 coming next week because we're gonna play D&D and it's gonna be great.